Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Fantasy Sports Review. I'm Phil Hargis. The Kentucky Derby was 2 weeks ago. It's come and gone. We had a great time out there. The Kentucky Oaks was a big success. It was a beautiful day. Kentucky Derby Day was another gorgeous day. We had a little bit of a surprise winner in Animal Kingdom. Doug and I completely whiffed on that one, but we'll get to more of that later when we sort of briefly recap the Kentucky Derby. But 2 weeks, kind of flies by after the Kentucky Derby, and then what do you have to do then? Well, you have to start getting ready for the Preakness. The Preakness is right here in the Washington D.C. area. It's up there in Baltimore. It's a really good time. It's a wild party. Lots of crazy stuff goes on there in the infield, but you can have a lot of fun, and maybe if you're lucky, cash a couple winning tickets. But since Doug and I did whiff on the Kentucky Derby so bad, we brought in another horse racing expert who did not really whiff on the race all. He was all over Animal Kingdom. I'd like to welcome Randy Moss from ESPN. No, I'm just kidding. This is Justin Dew. But
we both have shaved heads.
Yeah, we both have shaved heads and do look a little bit alike.
Oh, well, he's popular with the ladies, so I'll take that.
All right, yeah, and I'm sure Justin will be too after your big cash. Justin, set it up for us, man. You had Animal Kingdom. You were all over this horse. What did you see on him?
Here's the thing about that. I actually thought Dialed In was the most likely winner of the race. And, he was the favorite. And when you have a 20-horse field in the Kentucky Derby, or in this case we had 19 horses, I like to try to go for value. And I kind of thought Animal Kingdom was a horse that was going to offer that value and had a realistic chance to win. He had never raced on dirt. He looked classy. His prep races were strong and solid. And I really gave him a real chance. I won't say that I expected him to win. I wasn't surprised. He ran a great race, a very deserving winner. And I was lucky and cashed a nice ticket on him. So it was an exciting day.
It's always great when you can cash a winning ticket on Kentucky Derby Day. So now we're getting ready for the Preakness here. We're going to have Doug Cook, one of the other co-hosts, joining us here via Skype here shortly. Doug will keep standing by for us. But, the Preakness is something we brought you in here to break down the Preakness with us, man, for the first time. I mean, what are some of your best Preakness memories?
Well, I had Point Given in 2001, I guess that was. One of my worst memories was Fusaichi Pegasus in 2000. I really thought he'd win and go on to win the Triple Crown. So that was kind of a bad day. But I had Point Given. I had Looking at Lucky last year. The Preakness is a more formful race, I think, than the Kentucky Derby. It's a smaller field. You generally have less traffic issues. It's kind of been my experience, and I think most people who follow the sport would agree, that the Preakness is a more formful race, and I would say a little bit easier to handicap than the Kentucky Derby. And it's a fun one, and it's going to be a fun year. I think Animal Kingdom is a real chance of taking this and going on to win the Triple Crown.
All right, well, we'll hold off on our predictions for just a little bit longer. We got to keep the audience in suspense here, but we better not keep them in suspense too much longer, as we do have Doug Cook joining us live via Skype from some sunny destination down there in Florida. Doug, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you again after the Kentucky Derby.
Hey guys, it's good to see you as well. You can see I'm just chilling out watching the sunset down in Florida. It's pretty warm down here, but it's not too bad. And it's funny that Justin should mention formful for the Preakness, because I heard that word several times today on HRTV, and referring to the races at Pimlico, meaning favorites were winning. And so I hope that the favorite is not going to win for various reasons, the Preakness, because there won't be much money in it. Because the favorite will be Animal Kingdom. I think it's perfectly capable of winning, but we'll get to that in a second. It was an exciting Derby, and as you know, Phil, I was crowing about Animal Kingdom up to about 2 weeks before the Derby, and then ended up throwing him out because he didn't fit any of my criteria, which was a shame, even though I liked his look and I loved his pedigree.
Yeah, you can't bet on every horse in the Kentucky Derby as much as you'd like to. You just kind of have to take a couple, roll with them, and then just kind of hope for the best. Doug, like last year when we had Super Saver. I mean, that was our year. This was clearly Justin's year. So. Very nice.
Yeah, and I haven't had a lot of those years, so I'm going to take it and enjoy it, and hopefully it won't be another 8 or 10 years before I have another Derby winner.
Yeah, and now Justin has actually a lot more horse experience than we do. Doug, he he went to college in Kentucky. He worked at Teller Windows at Keeneland. He used to write for KentuckyDerby.com, so he knows that track inside and out as well, and he knows about all the magical wonders that can come from one or two good cashes.
Yeah, it doesn't take much. I mean, having Animal Kingdom on top, you would think that I was cashing tickets for hours after the race, and I wasn't. I had a win place bet on Animal Kingdom, and I hit that. I didn't hit the exacta or the trifecta, the superfecta, or anything else. So, you know, from a handicapping standpoint, and I'm talking the whole day too. It wasn't just the Derby; it was the undercard as well. I didn't cash anything. So from a handicapping standpoint, it was not a great day, but it only takes that one right opinion to make a profitable day when you're playing the horses.
And you know, Doug, you know, that's one of the great things about a Derby day, about a Preakness day, is that there are so many people out there that are wagering on these events, you know, and you know, 75% of these guys have no clue what they're doing. They're just out there, you know, placing bets for the first time, chucking tons of money into these pools that swell to massive amounts of money. So that's when you really have an opportunity to like take home a good score. The Preakness is a little bit harder to come by because these races do run to form. I mean, a lot of the times, for the, you know, at least in the 2000s and even back into the late 90s, the Kentucky Derby winners have been going on to win the Preaknesses at, you know, a pretty good percentage there. I mean, again, the smaller fields and, you know, not as many people willing to take them on, and the newcomers just aren't nearly as competitive some of the time. So you know, moving along, you guys. I mean, anything else stick out in your mind for the Kentucky Derby here? Like somebody that may have run a bad race that's gonna be ready for a big race. And what did you see in that race when you guys watched it?
Well, personally, for me, I saw a race that was remarkably cleanly run. No one had any traffic problems at all.
Except for maybe Arch.
Well, he had the injury, I suppose, and maybe a saddle slipped or something. But as far as traffic is concerned, you really expect in a 20-horse field that you're going to have some traffic problems. Horses, you know, running into the back of another horse, so on and so forth. The pace was stunningly slow, in my opinion. I mean, I think it was the slowest opening half mile, maybe opening 3/4 of a mile since like the 1940s. And watching the race unfold, I really thought that Shackelford was in perfect position, and he had absolutely no excuse for not winning. I mean, he just came up empty in the stretch and ran a decent fourth. But other than that, no one had an excuse. And to me, that really signals that Animal Kingdom, not only, you know, did he win the race, not only was he a very deserving winner, he ran by far the most impressive race of anybody else. Being back mid-pack behind slow fractions like that, he was really at a tactical disadvantage to horses like Shackelford and Narrow and Mucho Macho Man, who were up close, who just, you know, came up empty essentially in the stretch. Another horse that really did not, well, he didn't have any traffic problems, but Dialed In he was last, I think something like 17 or 18 lengths off the early pace, which means he ran his opening half mile in about 52 seconds. That is stunningly slow as well, and it made it completely impossible for him to run a winning race. He would have had to have run his final half mile in something like 45 seconds if he was to win the race, and there's just no horse that can do that after, you know, running 3/4 of a mile at that speed. So clean race, a lot of horses with no excuse, many of whom are coming back in the Preakness, and I think we're going to talk about a lot of them individually and see how that factors into our handicap.
Yeah, we totally will. Doug, I mean, with regards to Dial In, I mean, that horse was so far back. I mean, don't you think that Julian Leparoux, you know, riding Dialed In that race, should have seen the fact that, like, it wasn't Comet at the top or some of those other early speed, that all of a sudden it was Shackelford up there setting that kind of that lollygaggling pace, and maybe just adjusted Dial In's racing strategy based on that?
Well, you know, I think sometimes it's hard for a jockey at a race of that distance to be able to really tell the difference between 1 or 2 seconds on the pace for a half mile. You know, it's only a half second, a quarter mile. He probably thought they were blazing along up at front like they usually do, and he was wrong about that. And that was just a underestimation. Dialed In runs from behind as you know, as usual, and he was just, you know, like Justin said, he was way too far back. He was in last place by far throughout the first half a mile in 48 and almost 49 seconds, slowest in many decades. So, Dialed In didn't have any excuses. We'll get to later, though. He did run the fastest final quarter in the Kentucky Derby and ended up way short because he started way too far behind.
Clearly, I mean, Animal Kingdom ran a big race and was a very deserving winner. Let's start getting excited about the Preakness, guys. You know, what do you think? It's coming up here in a couple days. We ended up with, for the first time in recent memory that I can think of, a full 14-horse field, which I think is really exciting, and another good race to start getting really excited about here. I mean, that doesn't happen every time at the Preakness.
No, and it's good. I mean, anytime you have a big field, that increases your gambling opportunities, and I think, given the complexion, I tell you, I would have liked to have seen Narrow decide to come to the race. I think that would have really had a dramatic impact on the odds. But with a 14-horse field, you know, it's still a big field. It's not as big as the Kentucky Derby, but you still have to worry about things like, you know, pace and trip and you know, traffic issues and so forth. So there's going to be a lot of ways to handicap this and a lot of different angles you can have. And with a full field of 14, there's a lot of different ways you can go, especially if you're trying to cash a big ticket.
Okay, Doug. Well, now that Justin's gone ahead and brought up pace, let's talk about how the pace of this race is going to set up, and then this will sort of bring us in to talk about some of the horses as they come up. Who do you expect to be on the early pace up there at the Preakness when the starting gun goes off around 5:30, 6:15, something like that, on Saturday? And that's and of course that is if the world does not end on Saturday. Let's hope we at least get to see the Preakness go off before the world ends.
Yeah, I think the world is scheduled to end after the Preakness. But that's also, it will really be apocalyptic if Norman as Bjornsson, or whatever you call him, wins the Preakness. Then the world, that will be a signification that the world has actually ended. But let's get back to reality here for a second. And I want to show you some of my performance figures, Preakness by the numbers. I actually highlighted in bold the early speed horses in this race. And what happens is, obviously, there isn't really a lot of true speed front runners in here, but there are several. There's Flashpoint, Shackelford, and Dance City, and those are the horses that are going to have to be reckoned with. Norman as Bjornsson is really fake speed and really kind of a throw-out horse, so I wouldn't put too much credence in him. But you can see with the E7s and the E6s, E7s there, those are kind of the speed horses that are going to have to be reckoned with on the pace in the Preakness.
And so of all those horses, who do you expect to be on the lead there, Justin?
Well, I think given the way the post position draw went, Flashpoint's going to be on the early lead. He drew inside of Shackelford, right, and Dance City,
yes,
who are the other early speed horses. So I see Flashpoint, Shackelford being 1-2 within a length of each other going into the far turn down the backstretch. I think Flashpoint will probably take them to the top of the stretch. Shackelford as well will be right there. There's no reason to think he's not going to be up close. You know, in the Kentucky Derby, I think they anticipated Shackelford being a little bit off the pace. He ended up being on the pace with Kama the top behind him, which was kind of a surprise. But
that was a surprise.
It really was. So I think those are your front runners. As far as what kind of pace we're going to expect, you know, I certainly don't think we're going to see 48 and change like we did in the Kentucky Derby. That doesn't mean we're going to see 45 or 46 flat or something. But I do think it's going to be a more honest pace, which I think is going to make it more difficult in the Preakness than it was in the Derby for front runners to have a tactical advantage like they normally will try to have.
Now, I think Flashpoint is certainly capable of setting a sub-45 half. Doug, let's go back to the Florida Derby here. Flashpoint was outside of Shackelford in that race, so Shackelford got to the early lead there and was able to obviously take that almost to the wire before getting beat up there by Dialed In. How do you see that Flashpoint and Shackelford battle turning out on Saturday?
Well, you're right about that. Certainly, Flashpoint had some problems in the Florida Derby. He was 5 wide through the first turn. He was 3 wide the final turn. That was a little bit wide for a speed horse to try to, that was trying to get to the lead. And I'm not sure exactly. It didn't look like Gawky was fighting him or anything, but I expect that they will make a more concerted effort to get to the lead in this Preakness. And what I'd like to point out about the Florida Derby, if you look at the previous race in the Hutchinson, which Flashpoint blazed away, taking over the lead after 6 furlongs at 108 and change, and then he couldn't seem to get 6 furlongs in even 111 in the Florida Derby. I think you have to account for the fact that he just didn't run his race. And if you go back to the performance figures that I showed you before, and I'm not the only person that will tell you this, but if you look at the Brisk figures, if you look at performance figures, bar figures, whatever, that 106 that he ran is pretty much in conjunction with a lot of other speed figures on the chart for that Hutchinson race. So he did blaze away in that Hutchinson, and it clearly just did not run his race in the Florida Derby for whatever reason, whether it was just a wide trip or he's spinning his wheels or the track was too dry or whatever. And by the way, this weekend the track is not likely to be too dry. It's because, as you know, if you've been in the D.C. area, it's been raining every day.
Yeah, we know all about that for sure. There was one more note on that. Actually, I watched the Florida Derby before coming up here, and I did notice that Flashpoint did have some troubles loading in the gate that day. It took him at least a good minute or so to get him in that gate, and he might have actually even busted through before that race started. So that horse was definitely acting funny on that day for whatever reason.
Well, he's by Pomeroy, who was a sprinter. So his pedigree does not scream mile and 3/16 or even mile and an eighth. I think, the Florida Derby was kind of beyond his limits. I bet him in the Florida Derby because I did think he'd be alone on the lead, and then he didn't make the lead breaking from that wide post. So, I think there's no reason he can't carry his speed, a mile in the Preakness, but I don't see him holding on late.
Okay, so let's say that pace scenario sets up that we're talking about, where it's going to be Flashpoint and Shackelford and maybe even Dance City up there. Are any of those horses capable of wiring this field, or is this going to set up and play to some of these more experienced horses like Animal Kingdom, Dialed In? Let's talk about Dialed In real quick, you guys. Obviously, this was the Kentucky Derby favorite. Dialed In has a special incentive of $5.5 million on this race. It's a new thing that Express Bet, or one of the online gambling companies, started doing this year. They offered the California horses and the Florida horses some incentives. If they could win a couple of their prep races, it was for Florida, it was either the Holy Bull or not the Fountain View, the Holy Bull or the
Florida Derby.
The Florida Derby.
Well, it was Magna Entertainment, the owners of Pimlico, Gulfstream, and some of the other Santa Anita, the other California tracks. They put up a promotion that if you won that state's main prep, which for Florida was the Florida Derby, for California was the Santa Anita Derby, and then another qualifying race throughout the state,
right,
which was the Holy Bull was one, the Fountain Youth may have been one, some other minor stakes in California were as well.
Yes.
Then you were eligible for a $5.5 million bonus on top of the normal winner's share in the Preakness. So that means Dialed In is running. He's running for $6.1 million. Yeah. The $600,000 winner's share, plus the $5.5 million bonus. If he wins, he will instantly become, I think, one of the 5 highest earning horses in North American history.
Because for all those years, obviously, the Visa offered the $5 million bonus for any horse that could win the Triple Crown. And
right,
a lot of them had some good shots out there, but were never able to do it. This is almost like a Triple Crown. I mean, it's almost as difficult a feat to win the first 2 legs of the to win those 2 legs in Florida and then come on and win the Preakness.
And I haven't quite decided, how much of a handicapping angle that can be. You would have to then argue that maybe he wasn't pushed to win the Kentucky Derby, which, to be perfectly honest, some people have suggested that. Some people have said that you're crazy to suggest they didn't want to win the Kentucky Derby.
Rights alone.
Yeah, exactly. And Nick Zito, the trainer, and Bob LaPenta, the owner, really want the Kentucky Derby. Nick's had it twice. Bob LaPenta's never won it. Came really close last year with Icebox, who ran second. But if you look at it from that standpoint, Dialed In really was not pushed in the Kentucky Derby. He ran, as we've talked about, that opening half in 52 seconds. Okay, now, I'm not saying that was a tactical decision. It may have just been like Doug suggested. Leperoux wasn't quite sure how slow they were going. But I can tell you this: that as little as the Kentucky Derby took out of Animal Kingdom, I think it took less out of Dialed In. And the $5.5 million on top of the normal $600,000 winner's share, I think that's significant, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Preakness.
That could certainly set up an awesome duel between Dialed In and Animal Kingdom there. Doug, how much of a factor are you going to put on that the $6.1 million prize there with Dialed In? And are you quick to dismiss Dialed In yet?
No, you can't dismiss him. I would say, without the knowledge of the $5.5 million bonus, I would say, Nick Zito, what is wrong with you? Okay, because I know what you want to do is save this horse and win the Belmont, because that's your favorite race to win. But obviously, he gets a direct $600,000 if he wins the Preakness. So it's a no-brainer to put Dialed In, and unless something's wrong with the horse, it's a no-brainer to put him in there. And that would put extra incentive on him to strategize with Julian and say, look, this is the Preakness. And he knows, he's won the Preakness before too, and he knows that you have to be closer to the lead Preakness than doing the Derby in general to begin with. So they're going to strategize, and they're going to be a major factor and may end up winning this race. It's certainly one of the most serious contenders. When you're running for $6 million, you're a very serious contender.
It's hard to argue with that. Okay, and then just to clean up the rest of these Derby runners here, we have Mucho Macho Man, who ran a pretty good race and finished 3rd. This is a horse that does finish in the money, fairly consistency. And we also have Midnight Interlude, a horse that I was kind of reluctantly on for the Derby, but still fairly inexperienced and kind of green to really expect him to step up and win the Derby.
Yeah, and I've got a pretty strong opinion on Mucho Macho Man, and this goes back to, as long as I've been following the sport, back to the mid-'90s, that horses that run a visually impressive race in defeat in the Kentucky Derby, come back in the Preakness, and then get horribly overbet and lose. Okay, it's happened. Before you and I started the show, we talked about a dozen or so horses that fit that profile.
Sure.
And I think Mucho Macho Man is one of them. He ran 3rd. Somebody had to finish 3rd. Okay, Mucho Macho Man, Narrow, Shackelford. the second, third, and fourth place finishers in the Derby, they had no excuse for not winning, okay, none whatsoever. Did they look good on video? Sure they did. But to think that any of those horses could have come out of the Kentucky Derby and turned the tables on Animal Kingdom and the Preakness, anybody who thinks that, I don't think was watching the same race. I mean, Animal Kingdom blew their doors off and won with something left in reserve. So I think Mucho Macho Man will be overbet. It would not surprise me if he ends up being the second favorite in the race, ahead of Dialed In, and I won't be using him at all. If he wins, I will rip up all of my tickets because I'm not going to be using him at all in any capacity. Same with Midnight Interlude, who